Hello friends, and I welcome you again to this course titled as Introduction to Indian Writing in English. Friends, in the last class we were discussing Unit 6. With Unit 6 we started a very famous, a very popular text which is titled as Train to Pakistan. This is the text which established Khushwant Singh as a literary canon in the world of literature, in the world of novel writing. We discussed one topic that was related to trauma. What was the ecstasy of trauma at the time of partition? And how trauma was associated with the other factors in, let's say, at the time of partition. Friends, we have to understand that when partition took place, not a single person in India remained unaffected from it. After discussion on partition and trauma, we have to, let's say in this unit, Unit 7, we have to come up with a new topic related to the same text, Train to Pakistan, and the topic which we are going to discuss today is intermingling of history and literature. Friends, today we will understand that this book, Train to Pakistan, is based on a historical incident. The incident which has influenced not only India subcontinent but the politics of entire world. So when we read this novel, we have to read it from not only from the perspective of literature, but we also have to study it from the perspective of history. And in today's class, we will look at the, let's say, at this novel from the perspective of history. The historical context will help you in understanding the, let's say, the depth of the text, the intensity of this historical incident, which is why when we talk about the outcome of this lecture, what will you learn from this lecture? How will you, let's say, face and how will you visualize the situation of partition? These things will be understood on the basis of the detailed, let's say, description of historical context in reference to the text discussed. The text is Train to Pakistan. So, with this note, let us try to understand that how history and literature were intermingled into this text, Train to Pakistan. The novel falls into the category of historical fiction. Friends, there is a term into literature, the term is clear in itself. The term is titled as historical fiction. Historical fiction means a fiction which is based on some historical incident. You might say that if it is based on a historical incident, then why can't we call it as, let's say, a historical incident only? Why only fiction? Well, friends, the writers had the liberty to add some fancy, to add some imagination into the incident. I told you in the last class that this fiction, this novel is based on the story of a border village. The village lies at the border of India and Pakistan. And the name of the village is Mano Majra. Now in that village, we have Sikhs and we have Muslims. Few Hindus are also there, but basically this story is based on the conflict between Sikhs and Hindus, which started when a train came from Pakistan full of the dead bodies of Sikh people or the people who belong to the Sikh community. So, I told you all these things in the last class, but basically it might happen that there is no such village on India-Pakistan border with this name Mano Majra. But the writer Khushwant Singh has a liberty to create such kind of facts, such kind of incidents which might not have taken place at the time of partition. There was a murder which happens in the beginning of this fiction, in the beginning of this novel. It might happen that no such murder happened in any of the border villages. Then there are some characters who belong to the police department. There are some characters who belong to the farming, let's say, field, and then many others. It might be possible that no such character with these names existed in the history of India or Pakistan. But Khushwant Singh is trying to create a scene to make everyone understand that how these incidents were able to influence every citizen's life in either India or Pakistan. The village belonged to India, so we are here focusing on the story of India only. So, the novel falls into the category of historical fiction and is set in the fictional town of Mano Majra. Fictional town which never existed. Mano Majra village do not exist in India, created by Khushwant Singh at the border of Pakistan and India in the summer of 1947. Well friends, Khushwant Singh has taken the scene of summer season. As all of you know, that summer is a very torturing season in India. There is too much temperature. Everywhere you have people starving and want to drink water, but due to the limited number of facilities, there are lot of problems and diseases which spread in India due to summer season, due to extreme heat, fever, mosquitoes, and many other things. In such season, when people have to migrate and they were filled, let's say the trains were filled with human beings, just like animals, one above the other. So, in that condition, we have to imagine that how much tough that summer season was spent by the, let's say, Indians. The political context of the novel is the 1947 partition of India. The book is told in the third person omniscient point of view by a narrator who is external to the story. Friends, the narrator, his name or her name is not revealed in the story. We can assume that Khushwant Singh is the narrator, and the narrator is omniscient. Omniscient means the narrator is present. We have to imagine this. Although practically it is not possible that one narrator is able to look at all the incidents at a time, but we have to assume that this omniscient narrator of train to Pakistan is present while all the incidents were taking place in this novel. So, we can say that the narrator is a third person omniscient point of view. Why third person? Because the story is written in the third person, not the first person or second person. You know that in first person we use I, and then in second person we use you. But in the third person we have to understand that there is an omniscient point of view which is presented by the narrator, who is external to the story. Now we have to also understand, friends, that the narrator is external, someone who do not belong to Manomajra. And maybe the narrator might not belong to India also. And then he or she is narrating the story. So the identity of the narrator is hidden in this novel, Train to Pakistan. The major conflict of the novel is the struggle amongst India's Sikh, Muslim and Hindu populations in the aftermath of the 1947 partition of India. You know that? We are here talking about the communal riots, the communal conflict, the genocide, the mass killings which happened from one community to another community. Then life in Manomajra is stilled save for the dogs barking at the night that pass in the night. It had always been so until the summer of 1947. Friends, this is a quotation. This is a line taken from the text itself, Train to Pakistan, page number 16. So in this quotation, we are here saying, writer Khushwant Singh is saying that in that summer season, particularly of 1947, the life of Manomajra is stilled, where dogs were barking at the trains, and the trains were keep on passing at the night. It had always been so until the summer of 1947. Friends, why did he say, Khushwant Singh says that until the summer of 1947? Because the trains used to pass Manomajra with passengers who are alive, who are sitting in the train and moving, traveling from one place to another in India and Pakistan. But in that summer of Manomajra, the trains were coming, but they had no alive people. All the passengers were dead. They were killed by some anti-community. The community about whom it is unknown, it is self-understood that if the train is filled with Sikhs, then Muslims might have or Hindus might have killed them. Or if the train is filled with Muslims, Sikhs or Hindus might have killed them. So we have to understand that the situation do not remains the same, and there was a torture in the air. There was a horror in the air. People were tensed when the sound of any train falls into their ears. They think that now they have to look at some, let's say, critical scene of so many dead bodies. The above quote is an example of foreshadowing because it describes how life was peaceful and quiet until the summer of 1947. Like in the remote villages, you also had seen that life is very still, life is very calm, life is very comfortable. People are concerned only to their routine works, their farming related works, they have cattle, they have to go to fields, they have to bring water for their houses, and the work is fixed between the males and females. The males had to perform these kind of duties, the females had to perform these kind of duties. But there is a point of foreshadowing. Well friends, foreshadowing is a kind of technique which is used by the fictional writers, fiction, and sometimes in the, let's say, poetry writing, into drama, foreshadowing is used. Foreshadowing is a kind of technique which suggests the hint of the coming incident. The incident might be good or bad, it might be threatening, it might be joyful, but there is some hint that something is going to happen in the coming scene, something which is not expected by the characters. Same was happening in Mano Majra when the people were afraid after hearing the sound of any train. This foreshadows that change is coming in Mano Majra and that life in the small village won't be the same. Just like, friends, different kind of trains are coming in Mano Majra. Trains with dead people, never expected by the villagers. In the same way, the life of the villagers in Mano Majra was also changing. It has some kind of change, and we had seen it, that in the peaceful environment of the village, the heat or the fire of violence started burning, and there was a condition of tension which started between Sikhs and Muslims, which never happened in past many decades. You will find big changes in Mano Majra. Now this is again a quotation. This quote from the sub-inspector is a great example of understatement, as he hints that what has happened in Mano Majra while Jagga and Iqbal were in prison. Friends, this quotation, this statement is given by a sub-inspector. There is a character in the story who is a sub-inspector. That sub-inspector arrests Iqbal and Jagga for the murder of a person. Although the policeman was not sure that these two are murderers or not, but he has to do some kind of formality, and thus he has arrested these two characters. And after some time, when he also can sense that something wrong is going to happen now in our village, he gives this statement that you will find big changes in Mano Majra. What are those changes? Those changes can be related to the killings of Muslims or Sikhs or any common villager in Mano Majra. That change might happen if the Muslims migrate from the village and move to Pakistan, and then the Sikhs will, let's say, capture the property and the houses of these Muslims, or maybe any other after effect. But the quotation is talking about the depth, about the seriousness of what is going to happen in this village within the couple of weeks. The removal of half of the village's population is more than just a big change and is a solid example of understatement. Well, friends, understatement is again a literary device used into literature. What is understatement? There is a very big incident happened and which is explained in a very simple manner. Take for example, if you are shot by some person in your leg, and then a doctor asks you what has happened to you, and you will say that nothing, just some, let's say, incident happened. So this can be called as understatement. A very big issue is treated in a very, let's say, small manner. So this statement, you will find a big change in Mano Majra, is an understatement. Because the migration of Muslims from the village is not something which can only be defined as a big change, but we can say that it is a drastic change. Everything in the history of this village is going to change after this migration. There are multiple allusions in the novel to several real life political figures, including Mahatma Gandhi, Muhammad Ali Jinnah and Jawaharlal Nehru, suggesting the intermingling of history and literature. Well friends, when you read this novel line by line, you will find that although these characters are fictional, let's say Jagga can be fictional, Iqbal can be fictional, or the sub-inspector can be fictional, but there are real characters also about whom these villagers are talking every day. These villagers are talking about Jawaharlal Nehru, who was the first Prime Minister of India. They were talking about Mahatma Gandhi, Rashtrapita. They were talking about Muhammad Ali Jinnah from Pakistan. So, writer Khushwant Singh has intentionally used the names of these characters to make a realistic touch into this novel. There are also several allusions to various religious texts, particularly the Sikh Granth. Well, friends, to make this novel realistic, to make this novel down to earth, to make the discussion, the discourse happening in the novel at a, let's say, realistic level, Khushwant Singh has used various allusions, various, let's say, incidents from the Guru Granth Sahib, Sikh Granth. So, those religious texts are presenting the, let's say, the reality of the discussion. The characters are talking to each other. As Muslims, Hindus and Sikhs resettle and cross from India to Pakistan and vice versa, massacres, killings, pillaging and rapes were widespread. Well, this is right, friends. All of you know that in this migration of a complete community from one country to another country, and in this process of resettlement, there was lot of, let's say, massacre, mass killings, there were rapes and all kind of brutal crimes which occurred. The people were looted. If they were having some jewelry or some money, their money was taken in between. About 14.5 million refugees cross border to what they believe is the relative safety of religious majority. Well, friends, it was just let's say an intuition in the mind of the people that they had the religious majority in another country, so they are safe there. So let move from this country to the next country. But there is no surety of life in such a mismanagement. They were not aware that how they are going to, let's say, survive into the other country, but they had something in their mind which motivated them to migrate. Furthermore, an estimated 2 million Muslims, Hindus and Sikhs are killed in the aftermath of the partition. Friends, something which had never happened in the history of the world. 2 million people belonging to Muslims, Hindus and Sikhs and other minority groups also, they were killed in this migration process. Something which the world can never forget. The years after World War II resulted in the restructuring of many nations devastated by the war, as well as the realignment in the international order. Well, friends, two things happened in the entire world. First was the changing of the borders. Friends, it not only happened in case of India subcontinent. Well, you know that Germany was also divided into two pieces. Same happened with USSR, in Russia and other countries. And migration is always devastating. The war is always devastating. And this has changed the realignment of the international order also. America emerged as the superpower during the Second World War. Earlier, Britain etc. were there, but then America became the superpower. So whenever such kind of world war or migration or the change in the border of the countries happen, the international power politics also changes. The Marshall Plan, a restructuring proposal organized by US Secretary of State George C. Marshall, provided more than $15 billion to help rebuild war-ravaged cities, industries and infrastructure in Western Europe. But friends, this was the case with Western Europe because it had money. Even in the change of borders, even when Europeans were migrating from one place to another, they had money to settle down at a new place. But what about India and Pakistan? The condition, the economic condition of India was very critical. Britishers had looted the country for more than 200 years. So we had no such infrastructure. The government has no such facilities for the citizens. And thus, this condition was very pathetic for India and Pakistan. Great Britain had to relinquish some of its colonies, including India, to finance the war effort. Well, this is, friends, one of the aspects due to which India got independence. People says that when Great Britain had to run the colonies, they need money. But they became bankrupt during the Second World War, due to which they were unable to manage their colonies and they had to leave India and move back to Britain. This action greatly diminished Britain, causing it to lose its status as a superpower. All of you know, friends, that Britain was a superpower till 1940s. But there was too much, let's say, mismanagement, too much loss which happened to Britain, that America became the superpower and the international politics changed. In its place, the United States became the most powerful Western nation, vying with the Soviet Union for international influence. Soviet Union divided and thus America became the superpower. The US also became the assumed protector of Western democracy during the Cold War and thereafter. Friends, you know that when the Second World War ended, not even then the Cold War stopped. The Cold War was also there between the First World War and the Second World War. So we can understand that during this Cold War, US was the assumed protector of democracy. It became the responsibility of United States to manage the peace in the entire world. Through literary narratives which are based on historical events, we get a more humanitarian perspective, which gives us an understanding of the people's emotions involved in the event rather than just statistics of the number of people killed and the political events which led to it. Friends, when we read the data, we get only figures. These many number of peoples were killed, this was the economic loss of a country, etc. But when we read such kind of historical fictions, we understand the ecstasy of the pain or the trauma which happened to these characters. Studying international relations with the help of fictional narratives broadens the scope of the discipline and makes it interdisciplinary. Well friends, such kind of historical fictions are interdisciplinary. Why interdisciplinary? Because we understand that okay, this has changed the international relations, and so reading such fictional narratives is very important. It makes the studying of international relations more interesting and attracts people towards the discipline. Otherwise, friends, international relations would be a very boring subject, full of figures and the historical incidents, etc. But when you read such kind of, let's say, fictional works, historical fictions, you find that international relations is very interesting. Literature in the form of stories, novels and poems has a wide appeal among people, and fictional narratives based on historical events help in conveying this idea better to the masses. When we read such kind of fictions like Train to Pakistan, a better idea of that incident comes into our mind. Merging international relations with literature helps in converting the complex concepts of national power, balance of power, and collectively security into simple narratives which are understandable to the people. People can understand after reading these fictions that what actually has happened into the country. Moreover, it tells people stories about people like them, transforming them into ideas they could relate to and hence are widely read. Well friends, these characters are just like normal life characters. We can associate with these characters and we can believe that we were present during that time of let's say partition in Mano Majra. Train to Pakistan, with the help of various literary devices like point of view, foreshadowing, understatement, allusions, etc. discussed before, is able to intermingle history with literature to discuss the wide and unending impact of this historical incident of partition. Well friends, how Khushwant Singh was able to achieve, let's say, this kind of seminal text with the help of these literary devices? When a writer uses these literary devices like foreshadowing, understatement, allusions, etc., the writer is able to, let's say, justify the intensity of the incident. And in this way, all these characteristics were able to make this text, Train to Pakistan, as a historical fiction which, let's say, can, let's say, incomparable to any other text of the world. So with this friends, I hope that you have understood that how history and literature were intermingled into this text, Train to Pakistan. That is all for today. Thank you for listening.